Welcome to The Fitting Room, the podcast where we ask the most human questions in fashion. We start every podcast with a ritual of asking one simple question. What are you wearing today? I'm Hazel from Lekondo, and every week we're going to be sitting down with friends, creators, and members of the fashion community to talk about the story behind what they wear, the funny, the messy, and the memorable. So today I'm joined by Yang, the CEO of Lekondo, and I can't wait to dive in.
Oh, hello. Thanks for having me.
To start, let's begin with the question at the heart of this podcast. What are you wearing today?
Yes, I'm wearing this is a raincoat by Capital. It's a denim version of it. It's kind of inspired by like the military workwear that comes, from like the US military occupation of the time. And so they kind of had a playful spin with it. The raincoat in itself, it's kind of hard to describe. And, I'm sure only Capital themselves kind of have a way of articulating what it is fully. But what it means to me is a couple of things. It's kind of like a subversion take on like military wear, and also just like a playful way of like thinking about denim as a fabric and kind of combining them into this piece that I think is like pretty timeless. It has a very interesting silhouette. It also has like a really long extended hood. Um, I think it really represents a lot of what I like about fashion, which is that it's kind of grounded by has an origin around something very rich in its history, and then they have a way of like elevating it and kind of adding flair and context around like something that's very traditional and making it kind of its own unique piece. Um, I also really like that this piece is like kind of like a mix between like boho chic and streetwear. I think it's like very playful. I think it can be dressed up or dressed down. I It's one of my favorite pieces. I love denim, and so I'm very happy to wear this. And it also has like a lot of buttons, almost way too many buttons. But the whole idea is that you can kind of style it in many, many different ways. And so it kind of speaks to this idea of like not only is the piece unique, but there's also like infinite amount of ways to style it. And so it's something that I consider very timeless.
Yeah, that's super cool. It definitely has like a really unique like silhouette. Like has a really interesting like visual shape that's very you. I definitely like associate like seeing this piece on you. If you were to describe your style in just a few words, adjectives or associations, how would you put it?
So it's always hard to describe what I think is like ultimately like a visual language with words, but my attempt at describing it, I think, is a sort of elevated streetwear with constraints. And so I guess that's like a loaded bunch. Elevated to me means like I think streetwear has this very grounded element to it where you're very grounded by the circumstance and environment around you. I think there's like an inner city vibe that is like somewhat playful, somewhat grunge, somewhat like don't take yourself too seriously, but take your work seriously. I kind of like all these like different elements, and I think they reflect my personality quite well, where I'm somebody who have these ideas about different abstract things, philosophy, meta, and all that, but I need to be grounded by my circumstance. At the heart of it, I'm, a big city person. I love humans. I love humanity. I love society. I love anything that can be a mirror and a reflection of my environment is something that I try to like represent. I think elevated streetwear is like just like a way of saying, can we make this a bit more sartorial? Like the idea of like dressing up and dressing down, being able to like blend in. Some of my favorite brands like Com or Capital have these really playful mix where you could wear them in like a more professional setting and get more understated pieces. You can also wear them in a way more casual and playful setting. They have like much more interesting pieces for that. I really like this idea of blending in based on my environment. That's what I mean when I say streetwear with constraints. I always want to be respectful of the context and the event I'm going to. For example, I recently went to an event at the Magic Castle, which is kind of hard to describe what it is. It's like a place where you can go and attend like shows and tricks with magicians that have been doing it for a few years, but they have a really strict dress code. And so it was okay, how can I like, dress and be respectful for the context in which I'm attending, but also like have a way of representing my identity and style and shared values in that. For example, they had everybody wear a collar and they had everywhere wear a suit. So I wanted to dress and respect that, but also have my own spin of it. I like to like playfully subverse as much as I can. I would wear like slacks, but it would be like very much drop crotched. I would wear like a suit, but it would have like, I don't know, like weaves and ribbons out of it. A way of like blending in, but also like having a taste of like being able to like express myself in those ways.
Okay, we can dive into that a little bit further into your fashion journey. How do you find
Yeah.
your style? Was it something that you sort of grew into, or it's something that you just always know?
No, not at all. I would say that I discovered my style very recently. I would say, as somebody who is quite deep into this universe, I'm relatively new to it. I have been kind of into fashion for the past 3 years. I would say that for the most part, I did not really first understand what it was about. And I think that part of Lekondo's mission is just the idea of exposing this idea that fashion is a visual language. Before that, it was always something a bit more one-dimensional to me. Maybe this is speaking more of my ignorance of the space than anything else, but to me, I had always thought of fashion as like not really a way of expressing myself. I felt like there were other mediums I had gravitated to. I have a writing background. I love writing. I have a music background. I love music. I had always felt that those were like languages that I had a more natural affinity to. I think my journey with fashion began when I was in New York for the first time, like in 20, 2016, and I remember seeing people dressed in a way that I had never seen before. And so there was something about the way that I had captured this person's dress. So I'm imagining a scene where you're walking down Bowery Street, and you're walking to Soho, and there were people who were dressed in a way that I felt like really captured the richness of their lived experience. It's one of those things that's really hard to put into words. What is it about like a trench coat and the assortment of boots that makes you feel like, oh, this person has a lot of depth? Again, it's one of those things that sounds weird when you put it into words, but I know my experience, like viscerally experiencing that. And it occurred to me that for the first time that, wow, I felt like this person was saying a lot without saying anything at all. That through the way that they dress and through the way that we're able to visually communicate with their silhouettes, that there was a very rich lived experience that was being communicated. That was something that stuck with me for a while. And when I had moved to New York, it reminded me that the city was full of life in that way. I think my journey with fashion just came from this exposure to how other people dress and realizing that fashion is a visual language of describing, is one way of describing a very rich lived experience. And so I had gotten down and deep into this aesthetic rabbit hole of realizing that there's so many different ways of being human. There's so many different lived experiences. And as a visual language, this is just one of many different ways of expressing it, but it is a way of expressing it. And so I first went into my own journey of understanding myself and understanding what are the different like tactics and like silhouettes I could use to express that, and then what is the manifestation of that expression. So like first thinking about what I was trying to say about myself, that in itself was a really healthy exercise. And then of course later finding and exposing myself to different clothes and silhouettes and colors that could have an effective way of expressing that. That was like a 3-year journey. I discovered a lot of different brands, made a lot of friends who were also into it, and kind of realizing that all of these things were connected. And I think just being in New York has really helped with that. New York is a very rich place with a lot of different culture. So, fashion as like an reflection of like where different people are from, for example. We're both Southeast Asian. We both have like, exposure to like the batik or like different different ways of like expressing culture. That has always struck me. And so I think just realizing that New York was kind of like a Cambrian explosion of all these different things, all these different subcultures, all these different like people from all the different parts of the world they're from and their lived experience, and seeing that in such a condensed place, I think made me realize that wow, this is so cool, and I just wanted to be able to participate in that.
Yeah, that's super cool and very well put, and I think very resonant and also very poetic. So thank you for that. I do feel like New York, sometimes when I go out on the streets, it's its own like lookbook. I feel like I'm having all of these exposure to the variety of ways that people express themselves. That's really nice to see and inspiring as well. I relate to the part of your journey where you talk about that. Were there any moments or people that really shaped the way you dress during your fashion journey?
Definitely. So I think my friend Jordan, he's somebody I look up to. He's somebody who has very exceptional taste. He is somebody that it kind of ties back to this idea of a reflection of the lived experience. Through this person's clothing and aesthetic, I was able to discern that my friend who I met in San Francisco, I've gone through a lot of different things in life. And so it really started off as a curiosity into someone's life, take away fashion, take away all those things. Just through their visual language, I was curious about this person, and through understanding them, kind of working backwards, not even trying to understand their clothes, but just understanding them. Who are they as a person, and how did they arrive at, the kind of the aesthetic decisions they made to like buy these things so that I could like better attempt to understand them as a person. And maybe you could argue you can never truly understand someone fully. I don't even know if I truly understand myself, but I love this idea of like the attempt of doing so, the attempt of, putting your stake into the world and manifesting that I exist and that I have different ways of my existing being perceived by others, and, fashion being one of those things. So he made a really big impression on me. And I think also just like exposure to like fashion in general, the history of it. Like, people talk about the Antwerp Six. People talk about like different brands and designers. Lemaire is another designer that I really respect. Just exposure to their ethos, to their ideas of like what fashion is, like as culture, as something, as some form of like rich reflection of society. Going down those rabbit holes made me realize that there's just so much context here that cannot always adequately be explained, but it rewards the curious. And so I think just by having that curiosity to understand what these things were really representing, I realized that there was like a whole language and a whole vernacular around this world that it doesn't shout, it whispers. It rewards the people who want to dig deeper and realize that there's so much richness here. So I think it's a combination of learning more about the history of fashion in general, what it means to society, and of course, like my friends who I really admire and have good taste.
That's a really well-rounded way to think about fashion and like approach this fashion journey. Is there any like book or movie or artist or influencer or cultural reference that you feel like really influenced your style?
The Devil Wears Prada, I watched that when I was a teenager. I didn't really understand that movie at the time, but I definitely think it lived in my subconscious in a strange way. I remember a scene when you were talking about like a top, one of the main characters in the movie was talking about like how so many iterations of that item went through and was dissected and was like some manifestation of someone's idea that by the time you see it, it had lived such a rich history. And I guess that drew attention to this idea that what you see in fashion as like the end product actually went through so many different cycles of iterations and ideas that as somebody who consumes, you might not realize that there's so much context behind that. But to realize that it has touched so many hands and so many different minds, I think that movie made an impression on me at the time, but it was only much later in life that I could really unpack the significance of certain scenes like that. I think in terms of culture, in 2016, I think a bit about Supreme. At the time, based on where I was in my life, I resonated with some ideas around this is not just clothes, it's reflective of a lifestyle, reflective of who I want to be. That was the first time that I had attachment to a brand and an ethos. At the time, it made an impression, but I wasn't really into fashion, so it didn't do much. But just unpacking it years later, it's one of those things where it lives as a kernel in your mind. When you fish it out, it's like, oh, wow, actually, that made a bigger impression on me than I realized. I think Supreme as a brand, The Devil Wears Prada, I think books, I don't know if there was like any specific book that had spoke about fashion in that way, but I do remember like a novel by Elif Batuman, The Idiot, inspired, obviously by Dostoevsky's The Idiot. I did like how, she had monologues about like how certain people dress was like a touchstone to the context. Some brands like to position themselves as, oh, Lululemon is like athleisure or Nike is, there's some kind of streetwear element to it. But really, I think there's also how people dress in terms of context. Like, what do people dress when it's raining? What do people dress when they're going on a date? What do people dress when they go through a breakup? I think there's also like a very rich visual language of fashion that's not at all related to the aesthetic, but the mood and the context. And I think that there were certain elements of that book where it drew attention to that. That also made an impression on me.
That's super cool. Thanks for sharing. So now on to the spicy question, which is also the question I'm most excited about to ask every guest. I think everyone have at least one like fashion mistake or mishap where they like bought something wrong or they overdressed, underdressed and show up just really unfortunate fashion mistake. What is your big fashion mistake? Like an outfit disaster or something you look back and laugh at yourself?
I think that's a great question. If I'm being honest, I still think about that a lot. I don't think I have anything figured out. The biggest thing is how something fits on you. Just because it works for someone else doesn't mean it works for you. If you think about your choice of clothing and your choice of any decision you make, honestly, it's not really just about how it works for others. It really is about like how it fits on you. And with clothing specifically, I might have like a certain proportion, like my shoulders might be a bit wider than other people, or my legs might be a bit shorter. You have to think about how you dress in that way. I guess the classic mistake that I made is that I looked at something online and I thought it was cool on that model. Obviously, when I wore it, it was nothing like I thought it would be. Two things about that. First is obviously when you buy something online, it's not really how it reflects in person, but also just this idea of the fit is really important. Not just like the fit as in the outfit, but the fit in like how it works with your body. A mistake I learned is that just because I liked it on another person doesn't mean it would work on me. There was a lot of trial and error where like I was buying something where I thought it would work on me, but it didn't. I feel like this is a learning process for anyone in any journey, fashion or like music. You kind of have to like go through the hours to just figure out what works for you or what resonates with you. To me, the first thing that was like a very obvious mistake was like buying something that didn't work on me but worked on others.
Is there one moment or event or like incident that you're like, damn, what's going on? What is this? What did I do?
Yeah, I guess like something I'm a bit neurotic about is that all the shirts I own are at least half sleeve. And I don't know why, but I really, really care about it covering my elbows. And so everything I own is essentially half sleeve to three-fourth sleeve, or like some of them being completely long sleeve. So I think that moment was when I realized I couldn't pull off short sleeve shirts. And there was something about it. Maybe I'm just overthinking this, but I don't own like a single shirt that is above my elbows, essentially. I think it's because it communicates something about me that I don't like, which is that I want to come across as relaxed. I want to come across as approachable. It's very important to me that when somebody looks at me, they feel like I'm somebody who's approachable. I feel that that's very important to me spiritually. I would like to think that I'm somebody who can find common ground with anybody. For whatever reason, that has somehow had a parallel in my own visual aesthetic of, okay, I think that any shirt that has a sleeve that is above the elbow would mean that I'm not as approachable. I kind of made a very conscious effort to like make sure that everything I own could at least cover my elbows to give that more laid back look.
That's super interesting because I also care like a ton about like sleeve length. I feel like anything I own is like no sleeve tank top or it's like
Hmm.
full long sleeve shirt. Because like I have tattoos and I just hate it when like I wear like a t-shirt and it covers half of my
Hmm.
tattoo.
Yeah.
Like there's like no optimal solution to that. So I feel like I own probably like two t-shirts. Like all of the rest of my tops are either like no sleeves or full sleeves. Like sleeve length really matters and the thing they convey like definitely matters. I overthink about sleeves too.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think that's exactly it, right? There's always like something you can have a microscope on in terms of like what you really care about. Some people really care about like color matching and making sure like the kind of like outfit colors like match like a certain like palette. I don't index on that too much, but yeah, when it comes to like sleeves or like collar, I guess everybody just cares about something more than others. I think it just shows you that this is very much a visual language. It lives in the back of your head, but if you really think about it, there's probably like one or two very quirky things about like the way that you choose to style yourself that matters a lot to you.
That's great. So onto like a little bit of like reflection arc of the past. What do you think your clothes say about you in general?
That's a good question. I think part of it was just what I said earlier, which is that I want to express myself in a way that is consistent with the values that I have, but also gives an impression of the person that I want to be. For example, I care a lot about having a very approachable look, which is why streetwear really resonates with me. There's like certain elements of streetwear that are like way more laid back, way more chill, way more like, hey, I'm just trying to be chill. I really like that. I want to feel like I'm approachable. So it's very important that your visual language expresses that. For example, if you're wearing a suit and tie all the time, then it might not always come across as approachable, right? You might come across as very serious, very formal, all about business. Obviously, I'm not saying that for all the people who wear suits, but it's just the context of it, right? You think about investment banking, you think about people like some kind of serious context. To me, being able to wear something that, you know, expresses myself as a person that wants to be connected with others is very important. A general life philosophy I have is I feel like everything I do is just an excuse to meet other people. If that's how I want to live my life, then it's very important that if the first thing someone sees about me is my clothes, then I have an opportunity to make an impression where I can communicate those ideas. If it means wearing laid back shorts or wearing longer sleeve t-shirts, whatever that is in my head, I think that's very important for me to communicate. I also like the idea of like rewarding curiosity. A lot of the stuff I own like be very like understated, but also express like some richer ideas I have for people that I think would notice. Sometimes I have like a button that's like upside, like if it's like a square button, I have it like somewhat subverse, or like asymmetric collars, like very small things like that, where I put a lot of thought into like appearing that there's not a lot of thought in it, but actually there is a lot of thought in it. I think it's this idea of like I want to blend in and not draw attention to myself, but also if I'm having a one-on-one conversation and someone notices that, I think it does say something about you. Where if you have an asymmetric collar, if I meet somebody and they have that, it says something about them that obviously is subjective and like different people have different takes. But to me, it makes an impression. It's obviously an impression that I think this person is thoughtful. I think this person is saying something about themselves. And again, obviously, it's a visual language, so it's not always easy to describe these with words. But one attempt of doing that is just like this idea of like communicating intent, I think. So I guess my style is very much, I want to express myself as a laid back person, approachable, but also very intentional. Whatever choice I make in my clothes or aesthetic decisions usually come from that lens.
If someone's trying to figure out their style, what advice would you give them?
This is a really interesting question, and I think it's partly why we built Lekondo. There are two things I would say. The first is before you learn to speak, you need to learn the language. I think it's important for somebody who is trying to get a better sense of style to just know what exists. There's like a strong sense of what are the different ways you can even express yourself through clothing. A mistake that a lot of people do is they buy stuff that they later disown later. It's not because the piece themselves aren't good. It's mainly because they have either evolved, their understanding has evolved, or maybe they bought something that said something different about them in a different time. And that's why there's like a saying around you want to buy things that are timeless, things that are like not sensitive to trends, because ultimately good clothes that you buy should last you a lifetime. I believe this, right? If you're not buying something that will last you at least 10 to 20 years, then it's really not worth purchasing, is my hot take. I really do think that like investing in good clothes is very much worth it if you make the right decisions. If you think about it, clothes is something you wear all the time. You wear it every day. So I think that if you're going to wear something every day, then, might as well just like put a bit more thought into the things that you buy. To go back to your point, I think just exposing yourself to what is out there is very important. And so even before thinking about what to buy, just think about how are different people dressing. Everybody dresses. Some people care a lot. Some people don't care at all. First, determine which side are you on that. If you don't really care about clothing, that's totally fine. It's a super subjective thing. Not everybody has to resonate with the idea of a visual language. I think if you can be honest with yourself of like how you think about this, then that's probably the most important thing. I think just knowing what other people are wearing is also pretty important. So you have a sense of like what is possible. There's also another very important point about this, which is that you should probably look at what you already own. This is very much underrated, right? If you look at the fashion landscape with shopping, there's always this idea of, oh, you need this, you need that, buy this, buy that. And I think that, yes, of course, if that's in good faith and with, your understanding and taste, then, by all means, buy that thing. But I think first, just start with what you already have. And it's a very healthy exercise to have, because one or two things will happen. It's either you will look at what you have and you will be confused on why you even have that, or you will look at what you have and come to an understanding of like, wait, I am drawn to this thing for a reason. Just knowing what you have is like a healthy exercise and a good baseline to kind of see what are the things you actually wear, what are the things you don't, and exposing yourself later to like what I could be interested in. I mean, this is kind of why we started Lekondo. Lekondo is two things. Lekondo is one, a tool for you to just be able to like lock your closet and to see what you already own. Then there's like this social aspect where you can see what other people are dressing. And also, if they choose to share, you can visit their profile and see the clothes that they own, their digital closet. I think this is a really cool way of encouraging that, where it's like, hey, if you're trying to get a better sense of your style, first, be honest with yourself on where you are in the spectrum, and then also have that healthy exercise of figuring out what you already own. Then, of course, being able to see what other people have and then seeing stuff that you might be inspired from. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe you can see something that works really well for them, but might not work for you. I think that is all just a really healthy exercise of getting to know yourself.
Thank you for sharing. That's really good and solid advice. I feel like it's such a good reminder that style is personal and it takes some time to figure out your style, and the journey of figuring out one style is completely not linear and messy, but it's just a way to satisfy our own curiosity and charting our own path, which is really cool. So thank you for sharing. That's it for today's episode of The Fitting Room. At the end of every episode, we like to give a little spotlight back to our guests. Where can people find more of your work or keep up with you?
Yeah, I write on Substack. So, Lekondo Substack would be, one place to check me out. If you're curious about any more about the ethos or just like my own personal style, I share everything on lekondo.com. That's the website I'm working on. That's the community that I'm building. I would like to think that we are, drawing attention to something very important in fashion, which is just this idea of fashion as a visual language. If any of that resonates with you, we would love to have you. I think those are the two places I'm most active on these days. Thank you again for talking to me.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your style journey. If you enjoyed listening, make sure to follow the show or share it with a friend. Your support will mean so much to us, and we'll be back with more story and more outfits. Until next time, keep asking yourself, what are you wearing today?
Thank you.